Staccato handguns are trusted and approved by over 900 elite law enforcement agencies, including 65 SWAT teams. When it comes to accuracy and reliability, the choice is easy with Staccato. Hey, welcome back. You're listening to Policing Matters on policeone.com. I am your host, Jim Dudley. And hey, check us out. We have YouTubes up of some of our interviews. You can get a good idea of what the person you're listening to looks like. Might have some graphics there for you as well. All right. Yeah. Most of you know I've already talked about my experience working in an urban big city environment. Yet we still employed an underwater recovery unit and a marine unit in the San Francisco PD. We're only 49 square miles, 7 by 7, but we are surrounded on 3 sides by water, the Pacific Ocean on one side, and then the bay that cuts across under the Golden Gate Bridge all the way down to the South Peninsula. So a lot of water, ocean, ponds, streams, things within the city as well. And today I am talking with an underwater recovery expert in sonar. And I met this character at ILETA in St. Louis just a few months ago, and it is Ray Witches, and he told me some unusual stories for diving for cars and weapons, and unfortunately a couple of bodies as well. Some of his stories may surprise you. Well, Ray Witches retired after nearly 3 decades as a conservation police officer with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Ray worked in the field as a firearm trainer, a fitness monitor, a sonar operator, and a trainer. He also served as Region 3 Public Information Officer and worked in the Reptile Undercover Unit. And I got to ask him about that. I hope he wasn't walking around in an alligator suit. Hey, he spends time as an evaluator and role player at the Macon County Law Enforcement Training Center in Decatur, Illinois. Welcome to Policing Matters, Ray Witches.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, Ray, I would say that a diver for an underwater recovery unit or anyone on the team has to be a little different, would you say?
Oh, yeah, they're a special group, especially with the water that I worked around and I ran sonar in. Visibility is very, very low. So you really just kind of were feeling your way. And, if you don't have a pretty strong constitution, you'll run into some things that'll scare you. Those guys, I've seen them come flying up out of the water scared to death. So it does take a special guy or gal to go down there in almost black conditions where you can't see your hand in front of your face and just feel around for, what you're hoping you never find.
Yeah, well, not only that, but you're in this environment that's almost nightmarish, and you're breathing through scuba gear. So it's not like you can step away from the action. You are in it.
Right. Those guys, and in my career as a sonar officer, to find a really good quality dive team was so valuable. We would call them from an hour and a half away, knowing that this was no longer a rescue, it was a recovery, to get the right guys or gals there, because once we located, we wanted them to be able to go ahead and finish the job without any more injuries or fatalities and quickly as possible, so that we could make final the situation, unfortunately, that we're in at that time.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit, about the trauma that you witness and some of the toll that it takes on the divers as well. Tell us about a typical call out. How would that go? You're working patrol somewhere else. What type of calls would you be summoned to?
There would be several different times where you knew that you were going to end up having to utilize sonar, where sometimes it would be a boat accident. Sometimes it would just be a fall overboard. Sometimes you're looking for, a homicide victim or a vehicle or a missing person that, you follow their route home and it happens to go by a lake or a pond or a river. So I carried a lot of my stuff with me. In the early days, we didn't have a lot of equipment, but those would be the typical, probably top 3 calls that we would get. Every once in a while, we would get one that we've got a capsized watercraft. So we had no idea if anybody was in it, if anybody was around it. And usually those are not even witnessed, just somebody sees a capsized watercraft. So we break out the sonar equipment and start right away, while our cohorts were probably running the boat registration, trying to find out who owned it and maybe call back home and see, hopefully they made it back home and they just didn't report the accident.
Hmm. And I would imagine you'd get your share of calls about evidence that may have been dropped in water, weapons thrown overboard.
Yeah, we get some of those, and those are a little less, urgent. We tried to find weapons and things like that. We found a lot of vehicles that people would steal and they would dump. They would, have their suspicion if something was stolen in Decatur and they lived, let's say, in Bloomington. We could kind of cover ramps or, ponds, lakes, etc., between those two. And a lot of times you could see the vehicle tracks, but other times there was lakes. Clinton Lake has 5 or 6 different ramps. So it would only take about 20-30 minutes to run a ramp, but to launch the boat, run the ramp, trailer the boat, then move to the next one, we're talking a day and a half to try to locate all those, or at least clear those ramps in suspicion of finding that vehicle. So we did find quite a few vehicles that way. We found vehicles, one of the best ones we ever found when we were just training, and we were just looking at the ramps and making sure there was no cracks or leaks, and all of a sudden we could see a vehicle. We could even see the trunk was open. So, nothing suspicious there. We didn't think anything of it, but it ended up being a vehicle that was stolen and dumped about 60-70 miles away.
And training is a big component for a unit with the usual minimum standards that an agency may adopt. We're talking about serious business. What kind of personal commitment to training would a recovery team member be expected to dedicate?
Well, as a sonar guy, you got trained originally. My original sonar was just the old paper graph that you used to see in Bill Dance Outdoors when he was looking for bass fishing, and it was very difficult to locate things with that. But that's what we tried to use. And then along came side scan sonar, which really changed the game. And since I've started training way back and since I've retired, the technology is amazing. You can really see a lot of stuff. But the training itself was a couple of days of just nothing, nonstop. We spent about an hour and a half in the classroom, and then we got out on the water in Southern Illinois, where they had put trailers and picnic tables and vehicles, and even one spot there was a crane and some other things. In another spot, there was actually a fuselage of a jet, so that we could kind of get the idea what all these things look like. We could find old bridges and things and identify it, because the biggest secret to sonar was really trying to realize that what you're shooting is to the side and not straight down. So it's kind of shooting to the side, and you have to kind of translate that angle of view onto the screen. And the biggest thing we always were taught, and I always taught, was if it looks like it doesn't belong there, then mark it. We'll put a diver down, and of course it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a vehicle in 30 foot of water, that's pretty easy. That's a big thing. You could recover. I recovered I want to say it was a 28-foot boat in Lake Shelbyville. And that was pretty easy to find because there actually had been air caught in the nose of the boat, and the engine had taken it down. So it was standing straight up. So it was a 30-ish foot object that you sonared over, and you could mark that pretty easy. So a body in 30 foot of water is a little bit different, because now you're looking at something that's maybe, let's just give them, a 6 foot tall person, but yet if they're laying on the bottom, they might be a foot tall, depending on how wide they are. So that was something that you had to look for and kind of interpret the outline of what you're seeing. And what it really returns is the shadow that you're seeing. So if the side scan hits this object behind it, there's no sonar. It ricochets back off of what that is, because bodies are pretty soft. So when you see behind it, you'll see more of a shadow. And if you see something that piques your interest, you'll crisscross it. You'll hit it at 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different angles, north, south, east, west, northeast, southeast, etc., until you really get a great picture of it, and then you can mark it.
Yeah, so orientation is a big deal, and I would guess, depending on how long the object or person's been in the water, then you've got an amount of silt, or maybe even marine life or crustaceans or something else that might change the original silhouette.
In Illinois, the silt is a huge deal, and that's one of the things that really caused it a real problem. We were trying to find weapons. It just made it very, very close to impossible. But as far as a person, if they sank down into it a little bit, we could see it. What we ran into a lot more was tree stumps. You could see tree stumps, and if you think about a tree stump that you see had fallen over in the woods, there's roots that hang out and sometimes look like appendages. So you would mark those, thinking maybe, if it's a 6-foot stump with a couple of appendages at the bottom, you would think, okay, let's mark that. And we had, many times where we'd send a diver down, and after we had marked it, and it turns out to be a tree stump. There's other times when it's very, very clear that you could see that this is either a tree stump or the body that you're looking for. So depending on the bottom, again, how deep it is, the depth of the water tells you how big the object will be. If you sonar something in 10 or 12 foot of water, the body's going to appear to be much bigger, as opposed to one that's 30, 35 feet. It looks a lot smaller. And that 35 feet is about the real. We found stuff deeper than that, but with just side scan, and we have other types of sonar in operation now, but with just side scan, that's about the maximum effectiveness of it, was about 30 to 35 feet.
Yeah, here in San Francisco Bay, we had a pretty famous case of this individual who murdered his wife, Lady Lacey Peterson, and he took her out on a small craft, dropped her wrapped in tarps and I think maybe cinder blocks.
Very familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah, and I know they originally spotted it through sonar and marked it, but then I think when they went back, the tides and the current had moved it, and they essentially had to re-find her. How do you document evidence in place? How are you lighting and documenting the scene? I mean, what are you under, once you find it, are you under a timeline to go down and get it?
Once we find it, a lot of the searches that I've done are in ponds or lakes. So really not much of a current. What you do run into in a river, let's say, I recovered a murder victim in the Des Plaines River years ago, and she was wrapped in a carpet. So you have to know exactly. That was very helpful, because I would have thought that was a tree stump itself. But the real issue is, if it's a drowning victim, they're going to sink even in a current. That's one of the things you have to remember. If it's a murder victim, they're not going to sink much as fast, and they are going to be affected by the current. Now, if you have difficulty or you can't locate the body in a certain period of time, and this is all going to depend on water temperature, what they've eaten, if there's any alcohol involved, is the biodegrading of the body and the formation of gases within it. So when it starts to float back up, then it's when you have the issue with the current. Because once it starts floating, there is buoyancy, and it is going to float downstream then.
And the lighting, do you use any sort of special lighting, or is that affixed to your vessel?
It's usually I don't know what the guys use. They can use a spotlight down there, but again, it's so murky and dark that I used my own flashlights on my boat up here to help if we were if we were in any sort of urgency. We would work through the night to try and find the victim. And I would use the flashlights that I currently sell to illuminate what we had, because the divers needed light. They're trying to work on what they've got going. They usually put down taglines so that they can make a grid search of where we're at. A lot of times we would mark it with an anchor, and they could just take the rope down within 3 or 4 feet of what I marked and just feel around in a circle. But the lighting under the water is around here was very difficult, because we called it black water. You just couldn't see anything. And it's a little, if you've got claustrophobia, it's not a spot to dive for you.
Yeah, I mean, I could think of some of the nightmarish situations that you've encountered. I want to get to those after the break, but before the break, I'd like to ask you about technology. Have you seen anything come after sonar? Are we seeing anything like a drone that goes underwater?
Oh yeah, they've got drones that go underwater now and do the searches for you, and that has enabled them to go so much deeper. And the drones have to carry lighting systems. I don't know how well it would work in the water in Central Illinois if it's really, really muddy and murky. I think one of the other problems with the drone might be the fact that it may stir up some of that. But if
Mm,
it's running sonar with the drone, then the murkiness is not going to affect it at all. So that has the technology for sonar has come a long way from just a simple paper graph that I used, and then I used the sonar side scan, and then we were able to get what's called a towfish, which is an effectively looks like a missile or a torpedo, and the transponder for the sonar is attached to that, and you can drop it down as far as the cable that you had. And that would make, if you dropped it within 20 feet of the bottom of the ocean or the pond or whatever, that's what it looked like. It was 20 feet deep. So you could really get down there and sonar a lot better. We
mm.
also had something called sector scan, which you could just drop in and it would spin. And it looked like that old round sonar or radar that you used to see on the old submarine movies, that pinged. And those were very effective, especially if you suspected the body had washed up underneath an undercut or in some brush piles. You could flip up the camera or the transponder and literally sonar into the bank or the brush pile that you're looking in.
Hmm. All right, I've got a bunch more questions for you, and some of them, we'll get into maybe some dark areas of our own. But first, I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor. Choose the handgun trusted by over 900 law enforcement agencies across the country. With Staccato, you can feel confident knowing you aren't sacrificing incredible accuracy for reliability. Whether you're protecting your family at home or on duty, Staccato has your back. Military and law enforcement receive discount pricing through the Staccato Heroes program. Visit www.staccato2011/heroes program.com to learn more. That's Staccato, STACCATO 2011/heroes-program.com. And we're back, and I'm speaking with Ray Witches, retired police officer, underwater sonar operator, working with underwater recovery teams. Police officers, Ray, already experience such awful first person and even vicarious experiences, trauma from situations and incidents. We've had people here in my area throw, children off docks into the bay, other heartbreaking experiences. You told me about one, about a vehicle down a ramp. How do you recover after a search for bodies in these situations?
One of the first things that you have to realize when you get there, you have to kind of stop maybe and just take a breath and think, okay, this is a pretty fragile situation. You've got to be as professional and really what I would just call monotone as possible. Get there, do your job, and remember that it is your job to assist in finding the vehicle or the bodies or whatever that you do end up recovering. We were always right there when they brought the bodies up after we found it. And again, unfortunately, sometimes there were children involved, but every one of the bodies and every one of the victims that you see really does have a little bit of effect on you. And that's one of the things that you'll see officers in a horrific situation. Let's say it's a murder scene, or if it's a horrible crash, vehicle crash, boat crash, or something like that. We have to shield ourselves from it in different ways. We're still in front of probably the media, the family, a bunch of bystanders by now, because the news travels so quickly, especially towards the end of my career when the cell phones came out. You could have, a news team there with it, quicker than I could get the boat there and get the sonar and launch. So we really dealt with it in different ways. And thank goodness nowadays there's a lot of help out there, and the stigma of, hey, you're a police officer, you got to be tough, is starting to go away. These guys we see a lot of bad stuff, that. So you have to either get help or make sure that you talk with somebody about it, whether it be the person that's on the scene or whether it's somebody that has experienced the same thing that of later on, a retired officer, somebody that's, you trust a lot and you can talk with. And guys will deal with it in different ways. You occasionally will see a group of officers at a spot where it's a pretty bad scene, and the news team catches them talking and maybe even smiling or laughing a little bit. They're not laughing about the scene. That's something I really want to stress. They're laughing about something else that's helping them psychologically shield themselves from what they've just seen. It's sometimes that's how they deal with it. So it is difficult, but you find what works for you. And if you can't find something that works for you, you find out where you can get some help. You got to talk.
Yeah, and you're right. We've had so many great guests who talk about PTSD and therapy and counseling and peer resources and so many others. So great that we have that now. But I can imagine still, we talk about swimming around in a dark water environment on a breathing apparatus, and then you encounter, a horrific scene underwater. That's got to stick with you for a while.
Well, and the guys that do that, most of the time, and I mentioned earlier, we wanted some really competent people. And a lot of those guys were either firemen, paramedics, or also police officers of some sort. So there's a lot of county dive teams that, they would come and help us out. We didn't have our own dive team because we're such a small agency and we're spread out, but we would call other county dive teams. There was a couple fire department dive teams that were just amazing. And they had counseling afterwards every time when those situations, and we were invited to it to talk about it if you had issues. And most of the time you went, and it was just a good feeling to talk to those guys. And then we probably had a cookout afterwards. But it was a deal where you really needed to get with the people that were involved in that scene or that situation. Like I said, they would come up and they would have that special look, or they'd give me that signal like, we've got them. And then, we would go from there. And again, you have to maintain that professionalism until you get to that fire station or that sheriff's department. And then you can kind of break down and start talking about, what you saw or what they saw and how you deal with it.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's your after action debrief, a burger and maybe a beverage.
Sometimes that's one of the best things. I know that one of the very first ones I experienced, I want to say it was around 1990, was a horrific scene. And they brought in, I want to say it was a priest to come and talk to us about it. And we thought that was kind of unusual. Nobody had done that before. And it was one of our fellow officers. It was the one that I'd actually gone to the academy with. So I knew him very well. And, you think you're doing okay, but it really I felt better after just a, 20-minute roundtable discussion with, who they brought in. And I thought, well, and the way they did it, it was like, okay, everybody's coming, not do you want to, or do you need to, we're just going to have a district meeting and everybody's going to show up and we're going to have this gentleman talk to us. And I like the way they did that, they didn't force you, but it was an assigned district meeting. So everybody showed up and it really made you deal with it a lot better. I remember particularly after that walking out thinking, I do feel better now.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. So switching gears a little bit, maybe end on a lighter note. What was your biggest unusual find you didn't expect? Maybe I guess you told me about one, the car you weren't even looking for. Anything else along those lines?
That was probably it. When we found that, we were just scanning ramps, just literally practicing. Probably, honestly, the biggest surprise was the very first, I think it was probably 18 to 20 days after my real training with side scan sonar, we got called to paint a lake, and we found, back then when you got called to a drowning, like, oh, this is going to be 3 days or 4 days. And we launched the sonar, found some waypoints, and we found the body within 18 minutes.
Wow.
We made about 8 to 10 swipes and dropped the anchor, and they came up. And of course, we were all acting like, yeah, we do this all the time. But me and my fellow officers, a guy named Bob Liebel, were just so ecstatic that how this training really worked. We believed in it, but we weren't sure it was going to be this much faster, because normally we had drag blind. We would, hope that we would find it before the body would float. And that's one of those situations where, it does work. And then you start to believe in it. You start to practice, a couple times a week. You just didn't have anything to do that day. So you went out and practiced with it. You want to talk about real surprises? We had a boat go over the spillway once, and we had to start dragging in a concrete opening of a dam spillway. And we found 2 bodies within 20 minutes. And again, unfortunately, there was 3 and we found the third one 3 days later, but the first 2 we came right up on, and we're like, boy, we're going to be out of here in an hour and a half, and then we're going to go back and do all our paperwork and get the reports from the coroner and everything. But that was kind of surprising that we were able to recover those first two. The coroner hadn't even showed up yet. My captain had been there, but the director and all these other people hadn't even showed up yet. So you kind of felt, boy, we are doing something that's a little bit worthwhile in a bad situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think your advantage is if you have a lake or a pond or something with finite perimeters, you're going to keep searching until you find it. In San Francisco Bay, the current is so swift. Coast Guard came out when a woman threw her children into the bay, and it was already a recovery at that point, not a rescue. And the Coast Guard threw out a buoy with some devices, GPS and lighting on it, and just to get the sort of pattern of the current to at least get an idea of where to look.
Mm-hmm. You really want to have a starting point, right? Where that last seen victim was last seen, so that you could start, and then you can kind of judge the wind and the current. It's funny to hear the buoy with GPS and everything, because we used an old milk crate with some old weights in it that we put aluminum siding, or the old shop aluminum that you used to make box traps out of, riveted to the side, so that would show up really well on our sonar, so we could tell the divers right where it was at. So we had to improvise that. So there's another sign that technology has come a long way, because we carried around a milk crate with some old 25-pound barbell weights in the bottom.
That's great. That's where those 25-pound barbells went.
Yeah, that's right.
Guys in the gym are losing their tone. Hey, so I want to wrap it up. Your bio talks about your role as a reptile undercover unit. You got to let me in on what that's about.
Well, years and years ago, and I think they still have these swap meets. They would have reptile swap meets in the Chicagoland area, the St. Louis area, and the Indianapolis area. And we started getting reports from pet shops that they were selling illegal reptiles. And it all started in Illinois. It's illegal to collect from the wild and sell. And there's been some other regulations and stuff in the meantime, but they knew that I was a person who had kept reptiles all his life. So I was one of the only ones that could identify. Now, I couldn't tell you scientifically why this was a Burmese python or a spotted turtle or whatever it was. So we had a biologist come with us, and he would set off to the side. And when I would go in and purchase whatever we ended up purchasing, he would positively, because we had to have that expert witness in court. But I knew what it was. I couldn't tell you that, because the carapace is so many inches wide and this, that. So he could do that, but I could say that's a spotted turtle, and et cetera. And we ended up buying we bought a Gila monster, a baby Gila monster. We bought an American crocodile, which is an endangered species back then. And we bought a Galapagos tortoise. And it was maybe 3.5, 4 inches around at that time. It was a baby. And what we had discovered was they were robbing the eggs from the Galapagos Islands, taking them to Florida and hatching them, and then selling them at all these places. So, I mean, any reptile almost on the face of it. We bought poisonous snakes. We bought all sorts of things. And a Gila monster is a poisonous lizard. But that guy ended up selling us that Galapagos tortoise and the American crocodile in the parking lot of a Red Lobster in Chicago at about 3 a.m. And he possessed a firearm when he did it. So now he's possessing a firearm in the commission of a felony. So he got 5 years in federal prison. So can you imagine how he had to tell people why he's in prison for selling an illegal turtle? But it's a very serious thing, because one of the biggest things that people import and sell illegally is animals. So you see a lot of that, and we spent, I think we made 38 cases just one summer of guys selling all sorts of illegal reptiles.
Yeah,
it was super interesting.
Yeah, I know out here the shark fins are a big item.
Yep.
Where they're catching sharks, cutting the fins, and then releasing them, and then they die. Of course.
Yeah, there's baby leopard sharks were just a huge deal way back. People that were really rich would get those, and they're beautiful fish. I know they're sharks, not fish, but they would they look great in their aquariums, but they were so popular and so in demand that it caused a real problem with those. And, bear galls is another thing.
Mm.
You could go on and on and on with all the stuff that they would, kill and sell, or just sell as a pet. And of course, once you get an American crocodile and you have it for a pet and it's 18 inches long when you get it, when it becomes 4 or 5 feet long, you just throw it into the lake and you've killed it essentially. It's not going to survive in the Midwest. So we seized many alligators and crocodiles over my career, and this thing called a caiman, which is crocodilian as well. So it was very interesting, and it was nice to be able to use what I had, chased my sister and my mom around the house with snakes all my life, trying to scare them. So that brought my expertise into working in the reptile unit for a while.
Who knew? Who knew it would pay off?
Exactly. Yep.
Well, Ray, hey, thanks for spending time. And I knew, running into you at ILETA, you had some great stories, and glad to get you on. Appreciate the work that you've done and the work you're continuing to do. Thanks so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, to our listeners, hope you enjoyed Ray's story. You can check out his bio in our show notes. And he's a character, a real authentic guy. And let us know what you think, and let us know who you want to hear from or hear about. Drop me a line at policingmatters@policeone.com and let me know. All right. Take good care. Hope to talk to you again real soon.